The river ran high that morning. Spring snowmelt from the distant mountains had swollen it beyond its usual banks, turning the water dark and fast, heavy with mud and broken branches. It moved with a cold determination, as if it knew exactly where it was going, and nothing in its path could stop it. Helena stood at the edge of the bank, her boots half sunk into the damp earth. The wind pulled at her coat, thin and worn now, nothing like the dresses she used to wear, when life still made sense. Her hair had come loose from its pins and clung to her cheeks, damp with mist and tears she hadn't realized were falling. She stared at the water without blinking. Not long ago, she had owned a small house in town, a tidy place with white curtains she had sewn herself. She had owned a trunk full of letters, a modest inheritance left by her father, and most foolish of all, trust. She had given that trust to a man who spoke softly and smiled easily. A man who promised marriage, protection, a shared future. She had signed papers she did not fully understand, because she believed love did not lie. By the time she did understand, everything was gone. The house, the money, even her name, whispered now only with pity or suspicion. He had taken it all and left her with nothing but silence and shame. Helena wrapped her arms around herself, but it did nothing to stop the cold that seemed to come from inside her chest rather than the air. There was no anger left, no tears she hadn't already cried, only a dull, hollow ache where hope used to live. She took one step closer to the edge. The river roared louder, as if answering her. There was no dramatic prayer, no final thought of redemption. Only a simple, exhausted truth passed through her mind. There is nothing left to hold me here. She closed her eyes and leaned forward. Strong hands grabbed her arm. "Don't!" a woman's voice shouted, sharp with urgency. "Don't you dare!" Helena gasped as she was yanked backward, her body stumbling hard onto the muddy ground. Cold water splashed her skirts, but she was no longer falling. Someone had hold of her solid, unyielding. She looked up, dazed. The woman kneeling beside her was broad-shouldered and stout, with graying hair pulled tight beneath a faded bonnet. Her face was flushed from effort, her breath heavy, but her grip did not loosen. "Are you hurt?" the woman demanded. Helena shook her head weakly, then broke. The sob came from somewhere deep, raw and unrestrained. She folded forward, pressing her face into the woman's apron, crying the way a person cries when they have nothing left to protect. The woman hesitated only a moment before wrapping both arms around her. "Easy," she murmured, her voice firm but warm. "Easy now. Cry if you must. Just don't do something you can't take back." Helena clutched at her like a drowning child. "I didn't know where else to go," she choked. "I tried. I really did." "I know," the woman said, though she couldn't possibly know. Still, she said it as if she did. Life has a way of knocking a person flat. Doesn't mean it gets to bury you. Helena pulled back, her eyes red and swollen. "You don't understand. I have nothing. No family, no home, no money, nothing." The woman studied her closely, not with judgment, but with something like recognition. "My name's Grace," she said at last, "and I don't much care what you've lost. Long as you're still breathing, there's something left to work with." Helena gave a weak, humorless laugh. "You make it sound simple." "It isn't," Grace repeated, "but dying won't make it better." She stood and offered a hand. "Come on. You can't stay out here." Helena hesitated. "Where would I go?" Grace nodded toward the dirt road that curved away from the river and into open land. "I work at a horse ranch not far from here. Big place, quiet. You can rest a few days, get your strength back." Helena shook her head. "I can't pay." "I didn't say anything about payment," Grace cut in. "And before you ask, no one there will harm you." That gave Helena pause. Grace's eyes softened just slightly. The man who owns the place, he doesn't turn people away when they're broken, even if he pretends otherwise. Helena looked back once more at the river. It kept moving, indifferent now, as if it had already forgotten her. For the first time that day, she took a breath that didn't feel like it might be her last. "All right," she whispered. Grace helped her to her feet and guided her toward the road. As they walked, Helena didn't notice the way her hands trembled, or how her body felt heavier than it should. She didn't notice the quiet fatigue settling into her bones. She only knew one thing. She hadn't died by the river. And for now, that would have to be enough. The ranch lay several miles west of the river, spread wide across open land where the grass bent low under the wind, and the sky felt close enough to touch. Fences stretched in long, deliberate lines, weathered but strong. Corrals stood solid against the earth, and beyond them, horses moved like dark shadows, guides, watchful, alay. Helena noticed all of it as they approached, though exhaustion pressed heavily on her limbs. Grace walked beside her at a steady pace, one hand lightly guiding her elbow whenever the ground dipped. She said little, letting the land speak for itself. At the center of the ranch stood the main house, broad, low, built of timber, darkened by years of sun and dust. It was not grand, but it was solid, the kind of place meant to last. "That's his house," Grace said, following Helena's gaze, "and mine too, for that matter." His. Helena did not ask who he was. Something in Grace's tone suggested that the answer carried weight. They had just reached the yard when a man stepped out of the barn. He was tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the unhurried confidence of someone used to command over land, animals, and himself. His dark hair was pulled back at the nape of his neck, streaked faintly with gray, though he could not have been much past his mid-30s. His face was sharply set, weathered by sun and wind, and his eyes dark, unreadable, lifted at the sound of footsteps. Helena felt the air shift. Grace stopped. "Hunter," she called. The man's gaze moved from Grace to Helena and paused there, assessing. Not curious, not shy, simply aware. "What happened?" he asked. His voice was low, steady, carrying no unnecessary emotion. Grace did not hesitate. "I found her by the river." That was all she said, but it was enough. Hunter's jaw tightened, just slightly. His eyes returned to Helena, lingering this time not on her face, but on her posture, the way her shoulders folded inward as if she were bracing for a blow that had already fallen. "How long?" he asked Grace. "Long enough," she replied. "She needs rest." Silence stretched between them. Hunter turned at last, gesturing toward the house. "She can stay a few days, until she's steady." No warmth softened the words. No promise lay beneath them. It was a statement of fact, nothing more. Helena swallowed. "Thank you," she said quietly. Hunter did not answer. He turned back toward the barn, already dismissing the matter as settled. Grace watched him go, something like concern passing over her face, before she guided Helena inside. The guest room was small, but clean. A narrow bed, a wash basin, a single window, looking out over the corrals. Helena sank onto the mattress the moment Grace left her alone, exhaustion overtaking her like a tide. That night, she slept without dreams. Hunter Mendoza had learned early not to belong too fully to any one world. He was Apache by blood, raised among people who valued strength, endurance, and silence. But his mother had died young, and his father, proud, stubborn, had refused to bow to changing laws that pushed their people off land that had once been theirs. When Hunter was 15, his father was killed in a dispute with settlers over grazing rights. The authorities called it an accident. Hunter knew better. What followed was a slow unraveling. His mother was taken east to live with distant relatives. Hunter remained behind, unwanted by the tribe that saw him as compromised, and distrusted by the white ranchers who saw him as dangerous. Only Grace stayed. She had been hired as a cook in those early years, but her role grew into something much more permanent. She fed him, scolded him, taught him letters when no school would take him, and stood between him and men who mistook youth for weakness. When Hunter took over the land fighting for it, inch by inch, through legal battles and brute perseverance, Grace walked beside him every step of the way. She never asked for gratitude. He gave it anyway. Years later, when he married, Grace had been there too. She had held his wife's hand during the pregnancy, whispered prayers under her breath when the labor dragged on far too long. Hunter remembered the screams, the blood, the stillness that followed. He remembered holding his wife's hand after it had gone cold, staring at a child who never drew breath. That night carved something out of him that never fully healed. From then on, Hunter poured himself into the ranch. Horses did not lie. Land did not betray. Work did not abandon you in the night. People did. Grace found him that evening in the tack room, running a cloth along a saddle with unnecessary force. "She's asleep," Grace said gently. Hunter nodded without looking up. "She's been through hell," Grace continued. "Lost everything. Nearly lost herself." "That happens," Hunter replied. "Doesn't make it my business." Grace studied him. "You heard me say I found her by the river." "Yes." "And you still think it isn't your business?" Hunter's hand stilled. "I said she could stay a few days." Grace stepped closer. "You don't turn people away when they're broken. You never have." Hunter finally looked at her then, something dark flickering in his eyes. "Don't mistake obligation for kindness." Grace met his gaze without flinching. "Don't mistake fear for strength." The words landed heavy. Hunter looked away first. The next morning, Helena rose early, though her body protested. She washed, dressed in borrowed clothes Grace had laid out, and stepped cautiously into the main house. Hunter sat at the table, reading over ranch ledgers. He did not look up when she entered. "I'd like to help," Helena said, forcing her voice steady. "If I'm staying, even for a short while, I don't want to be a burden." Hunter closed the ledger slowly. "What can you do?" "I can read and write. I can keep records. Organize supplies. I learn quickly." Grace, standing by the stove, hid a smile. Hunter considered her for a long moment. Then he nodded once. "There's work in the office, light work." Relief flickered across Helena's face. "Thank you." "This isn't charity," he added. "You earn your keep." "I wouldn't have it any other way." As Helena turned to follow Grace, she did not see the way Hunter watched her go, quiet, guarded, and with a tension he could not yet name. He told himself it was caution. He did not yet recognize it as the first crack in the walls he had built so carefully around his heart. Helena discovered quickly that the ranch ran on order. Not the rigid kind enforced by shouting or threats, but a quieter discipline, early mornings, clear expectations, and work done properly, whether anyone was watching or not. The rhythm of the place was steady, almost meditative. Horses were fed at the same hours each day. Records were kept neatly. Tools were cleaned before being put away. Hunter Mendoza did not need to raise his voice to be obeyed. He rarely spoke at all. Helena's work began in a small office off the main hall, where ledgers were stacked in careful piles and dust gathered along the window frame. Grace showed her where everything was kept, then left her alone without ceremony. Helena welcomed that. She worked slowly at first, her hands still trembling from exhaustion and lingering shock. But the familiar comfort of ink and paper soothed her nerves. Numbers lined up the way they were meant to. Lists ended where they should. For the first time in weeks, her thoughts followed a clear path. By midday, her back ached. But it was the honest ache of effort rather than despair. When she emerged to bring the ledgers to Hunter, she found him in the yard, adjusting a loose rail along the corral fence. He listened as she explained what she had organized, nodding once when she finished. "You missed a shipment from March," he said calmly. Helena blinked, surprised. I didn't see it." "It's there," he replied, pointing toward the office. "Under feed expenses." She flushed, embarrassed. "I'll fix it." Hunter studied her face for a moment, then shook his head slightly. "Later. You've done enough for today." The words were neither kind nor unkind, simply factual. Helena hesitated. "Thank you for the opportunity." Hunter turned back to the fence. "You asked to work. You're working." That was all. Grace found Helena later in the kitchen, rubbing her lower back with a wince. "You did well today," Grace said, handing her a mug of warm tea. "I made a mistake." Grace waved it off. "You caught it. That's what matters." Helena took a careful sip. "He's difficult to read." Grace smiled faintly. "That's because he doesn't want to be read." "Why?" Helena asked quietly. Grace considered her answer. "Because once upon a time, he let someone see too much." She didn't say more, and Helena didn't press. The days passed like that. Helena worked mornings in the office and afternoons helping Grace with lighter tasks, sorting supplies, folding laundry, preparing meals. She learned which horses were skittish and which liked to be brushed slowly behind the ears. She learned not to stand too close to Hunter when he was concentrating, and not to interrupt when he was speaking with his foreman. Hunter, for his part, kept his distance. He did not ask about her past. He did not comment on her quiet moments, or the way she sometimes stared too long at nothing at all. But he noticed. He noticed when she tired easily, when she paused mid-task, breath shallow, one hand pressed briefly to her side before she straightened again. He noticed the way she flinched at raised voices even when the anger wasn't directed at her. One afternoon, he found her sitting on a low stool near the stables, eyes closed, chin resting on her chest. A ledger lay open in her lap. She was asleep. Hunter stopped a few feet away, irritation rising before he could stop it. The ranch was not a place for idleness. Then he saw the dark circles beneath her eyes, the faint pallor of her skin. He said nothing. Instead, he turned and returned minutes later with a folded blanket. He draped it over her shoulders without waking her, then walked away, as quietly as he had come. Grace saw everything from the kitchen window. That evening, Helena asked, "Why does he help without saying anything?" Grace chuckled softly. "Because if he speaks, he might have to admit he cares." Helena shook her head. "I don't think he cares." Grace met her gaze steadily. "He does. He just doesn't trust it." A week passed. Helena woke one morning with a heaviness in her limbs that sleep had not eased. She dressed slowly, her appetite strangely increased despite the fatigue. Grace watched her closely over breakfast, but said nothing. When Helena nearly dropped a crate of supplies later that day, Grace caught it just in time. "That's enough," Grace said firmly. "You're resting." "I'm fine," Helena protested weakly. "You're exhausted," Grace countered, "and stubborn." That earned a faint smile from Helena. She lay down that afternoon and slept through to dusk. When she woke, the house was quiet. She rose to fetch water and nearly collided with Hunter in the hall. "Sorry," she said quickly. He stepped back. "You should be resting." "I was," she replied. "I didn't mean to." He held up a hand, stopping her words. "You don't need to explain yourself here." The statement surprised her. Hunter hesitated, then added more stiffly, "If you feel unwell, tell Grace." "Or Macy's." Helena studied his face, searching for mockery or obligation, but found neither. "I will," she said softly. As she passed him, She didn't notice the way his shoulders remained tense long after she was gone. That night, Grace found Hunter sitting alone on the porch, staring out at the darkened fields. "She reminds you," Grace said gently. Hunter exhaled sharply. "She's nothing like—" "I didn't say of your wife," Grace interrupted. "I said she reminds you of what it costs to be alone." Hunter said nothing. Grace rested a hand on his shoulder, a rare gesture. "You gave her work. You gave her dignity. That matters." He nodded once, jaw tight. In the quiet that followed, none of them yet spoke of futures or promise. But something had shifted. Helena was no longer merely staying. She was standing. And for the first time in a long while, Hunter Mendoza found himself watching another human being move through his world, not as a risk to be managed, but as a presence he could not easily dismiss. The first sign was the fatigue, not the ordinary tiredness that came after a long day's work, but a deeper weariness that clung to Helena no matter how much she slept. She woke heavy-limbed, her thoughts slow to boost spirit, her appetite strangely insistent. Some mornings, she felt ravenous. Others, the smell of coffee turned her stomach without warning. She told herself it was stress. Life had been a series of shocks these past months. Loss, near death, a strange new place among strangers. Anyone would feel unwell after that. Besides, her body had never been predictable. Her monthly cycle had always come and gone, when it pleased, and she had learned long ago not to trust it as a measure of anything. Grace, however, watched her with quiet attention. One afternoon, as Helena struggled to carry a basket of clean linens from the washroom, Grace reached out and took half the weight without asking. "You've put on a little flesh," Grace remarked peacefully. "Not much, just enough to notice." Helena laughed softly. "That's good, isn't it? Means I'm finally eating again." Grace hummed, unconvinced. Later that evening, as Helena rubbed at a dull ache in her lower back and yawned for the third time in an hour, Grace studied her more closely. "Are you sleeping well?" Grace asked. "I sleep all the time," Helena replied. "That's the problem." "And nausea?" Helena hesitated. "Some mornings." Grace's movements slowed. "When was your last monthly?" Helena frowned. "I'm not sure. It's never regular." Grace set down the dish she was drying and turned fully toward her. "Helena, is there any chance you might be with child?" The question landed like a blow. "No," Helena said too quickly. Then quieter. "I don't know." Grace did not press. She only nodded once. "We'll see the doctor in town tomorrow." The doctor was an older man, with kind eyes and careful hands. He examined Helena without unnecessary questions, his expression thoughtful rather than judgmental. When he finished, he folded his hands and talked gently. "You're nearly 3 months along." The room seemed to tilt. Helena stared at him, the words echoing in her head without meaning. 3 months. That couldn't be right. She would have known. She should have known. Grace reached for her hand, steady and warm. "It explains the fatigue," the doctor continued, "and the appetite. You're otherwise healthy from what I can tell." Helena nodded numbly. Outside, the sunlight felt too bright. The world moved on, as if nothing had changed, while something fundamental inside her had split open. A child. The man who had taken everything from her had left this behind as well. That night, Helena did not sleep. She sat on the edge of the bed, hands folded over her stomach, not yet rounded, not yet showing, but suddenly full of meaning. Anger flared, sharp and bitter. Then grief. Then a deep, bone-weary sadness that settled over her like dust. By morning, her decision was made. "I need to see him," she told Grace. Grace stiffened. "Helena?" "I won't beg," Helena said firmly, "but he needs to know." Grace studied her face, then sighed. I won't let you go alone. The man lived only a few miles away, in a modest house that had once belonged to Helena herself. The irony burned. He opened the door with a scowl that deepened when he saw her. I don't have time for this, he snapped. Helena held her ground. I'm pregnant. He laughed, short, sharp, ugly. Don't be ridiculous. It's yours. His eyes flicked to Grace, then back to Helena. You've been living among Indians. Who knows what you've been doing? Grace stepped forward. You watch your mouth. He sneered. You think I'll take responsibility for some bastard child? You're desperate. That's all this is. Helena felt something inside her go cold. You took everything from me, she said quietly. I'm not asking for money. I'm asking you to acknowledge. He raised his hand. Grace moved faster than Helena could react, placing herself between them. Touch her, Grace said, voice trembling with fury. And I swear. He shoved her. That was when a shadow fell across the porch. Step away from them. Hunter's voice cut through the moment like steel. He stood at the edge of the yard, tully and immovable, eyes locked on the man with a fury he rarely allowed himself to feel. You have no business here, the man snapped. Hunter moved closer, every step deliberate. You forfeited that right. The man swung first. Hunter didn't hesitate. His fist connected solidly, dropping the man to the ground with a cry of pain. Hunter stood over him, chest heaving, eyes dark. You will never come near her again, he said coldly, or I'll make sure you regret it. Then, turning to Helena, his voice steadied. The child, he said. I'll claim it. Helena stared at him, stunned. You don't have to, she whispered. Hunter shook his head. I know. He turned and walked away, without another word. The ride back to the ranch passed in silence. Helena's thoughts churned. Gratitude tangled painfully with confusion. Hunter had intervened, had defended her without hesitation. But why? When they arrived, Hunter dismounted and headed straight for the house. The door slammed behind him. Grace wrapped an arm around Helena's shoulders. You did nothing wrong. Helena swallowed hard. I never asked him to do that. I know, Grace said softly. That's why it matters. From the house, Hunter stood alone in the darkened room, hands braced against the table, breath and unsteady. He told himself it had been necessary, practical, the right thing to do. But beneath the reasoning lay something else, and old fear stirred awake. And along with it, a dangerous resolve. For better or worse, he had stepped into her future, and there would be no turning back. After that day, the ranch seemed to grow quieter, not because fewer people spoke, but because certain things were no longer said at all. Hunter avoided Helena. He did not forbid her presence, did not withdraw the work he had given her, but he shifted his movements so their paths rarely crossed. When she entered a room, he was often just leaving it. When she worked in the office, he stayed longer in the fields. When meals were taken, he ate either earlier or later. Helena noticed. She told herself she had no right to feel hurt. He had done more than anyone could reasonably expect, defended her, claimed responsibility for a child that was not his. Gratitude should have been enough. Yet the silence weighed on her. Grace, ever observant, said little. She moved through the house with careful intention, sometimes sending Helena to the pantry knowing Hunter would be passing through, sometimes asking Hunter to fetch something she knew Helena had already set aside. They met like that one evening in the hall. Helena nearly collided with him, stopping short just in time. I'm sorry, she said instinctively. Hunter shook his head. You don't need to apologize. The words startled her. He hesitated, then added more stiffly, Grace says you shouldn't be lifting the flour sacks anymore. Helena's hands tightened around the folded cloth she was carrying. I can manage. I know, he said, but you shouldn't. She looked up at him then, really looked. His face was closed off as ever, but there was tension there, something held tightly beneath the surface. "All right," she said quietly. "I won't." That seemed to ease something in him. He nodded once and moved past her. Later that night, Helena's back ached fiercely. She shifted on the edge of her bed, trying to find a position that didn't pull at her spine. Sleep refused to come. A soft knock sounded at the door. Before she could answer, it opened slightly. Hunter stood there, awkward and uncertain, holding something in his hands. Grace's voice floated down the hall. "Don't wake her if she's sleeping." "I know," Hunter replied under his breath. Helena cleared her throat. "I'm awake." He stepped inside, setting a folded blanket and a rolled towel on the chair. Grace said this might help. She watched as he arranged the towel beneath the blanket, creating a firm but gentle support. "For your back," he explained. "Thank you," Helena said, genuinely touched. He lingered a moment, then nodded and left without another word. Grace watched from the doorway across the hall, a small smile tugging at her lips. As weeks passed, Helena's body changed in quiet, undeniable ways. Her appetite grew, her steps slowed, and the faint curve of her belly began to show beneath her dresses. She tired easily, but her face carried more color now, her eyes less shadowed. Hunter noticed everything. He noticed when she paused too long in the sun and called for one of the hands to take over without explanation. He noticed when she winced mounting the porch steps and fixed the loose board the very next morning. Once, when she fell asleep at the table over a stack of folded linens, he stood watching her far longer than he meant to. Grace caught him. "You're staring," she said mildly. He straightened. She was tired. "She's carrying a child," Grace replied. "That'll do it." Hunter nodded, jaw tight. "She's afraid," Grace added gently. "I know." "Not of the baby," Grace continued, "of being a burden." Hunter said nothing. Later that day, Helena found a small stool placed beside her chair in the office, positioned so she could rest her feet. No one mentioned it. The first time Hunter touched her stomach, it was accidental. Helena had lost her balance slightly while stepping down from the porch. Hunter caught her arm reflexively, steadying her. His hand brushed against her belly, and he froze. Helena felt his breath hitch. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, stepping back. "No," he replied too fast. Then more carefully, "I didn't mean to." "It's all right," she said softly. "Really?" His hand hovered, uncertain, before he let it fall. That night, Hunter did not sleep. Memories rose unbidden: the scream of his wife, the smell of blood, the terrible stillness that followed. He sat alone on the porch until dawn, staring out at the land he had poured his life into, wondering when he had begun to fear people more than loss. Grace joined him as the sky lightened. "You don't have to punish yourself for caring," she said. "I'm not," he replied quietly. "Yes, you are." He closed his eyes. One evening, as Helena sat reading near the fire, she finally asked the question that had been weighing on her. "Why did you say you'd claim the child?" she asked gently. Hunter stared into the flames. "Because someone had to." "That's not an answer," she said. He was silent for a long moment. "My wife died giving birth," he said at last. "So did our child." Helena's breath caught. "I couldn't save them," he continued, voice low. "When I saw you standing there, I knew what it meant to be left alone with that weight." He turned to her then. "I won't let that happen to you." Tears welled in Helena's eyes. "I never asked you to carry this." "I know," he said simply. "I chose to." For the first time, Helena understood. Not obligation, not pity. Choice. Grace watched from the doorway, her eyes shining. As the months passed, the walls between them thinned. Hunter began calling her by name. Helena learned when silence meant comfort, rather than distance. They spoke of small things, weather, horses, the land. But beneath it ran a current of something deeper, steadier. One night, as Helena rested against the pillows Hunter had arranged himself, she felt a gentle pressure on her stomach. She looked down to see his hand there, hesitant, but present. The baby kicked. Hunter inhaled sharply. His hand remained. Neither of them spoke. And in that quiet moment, something inside both of them began at last to heal. The trouble came quietly. Helena woke one morning with a tightness in her chest and a dull, dragging pain low in her back. It wasn't sharp, not at first, just enough to make her pause as she sat up in bed, one hand instinctively moving to her belly. The baby was still. Panic rose fast and unbidden. She forced herself to breathe, counting each inhale the way Grace had taught her. After a long moment, there it was. A faint movement, then another. Relief washed through her so strongly her eyes burned. By midday, however, the pain returned, heavier this time, accompanied by a wave of dizziness that left her gripping the edge of the toilet. Grace saw it immediately. "That's enough," she said, all softness gone from her voice. "You're lying down." "I don't think it's," Helena began. Grace was already calling for Hunter. He came at once, taking in Helena's pale face and rigid posture, with one sharp glance. "What is it?" he asked. "My back," Helena admitted. "And I feel strange." Hunter didn't hesitate. He scooped her up carefully, as if she were made of glass, and carried her to the bedroom despite her protest. "I can walk," she insisted weakly. "I know," he said. "I won't risk it." Grace sent for the doctor, her hands steady, but her eyes tight with worry. Hunter sat beside the bed, his presence a solid weight in the room. He didn't touch her at first, just stayed close, his hand resting on the edge of the mattress. "I'm scared," Helena whispered after a long silence. Hunter swallowed. "So am I." The admission surprised them both. The doctor arrived before dusk and examined her carefully. After what felt like an eternity, he straightened. "She's overexerted," he said. "The child is fine, but she needs rest, strict rest." Helena let out a shaky breath. Hunter nodded once. "She'll have it." That night, after Grace had settled Helena with tea and extra blankets, Hunter remained. The house was quiet. The fire burned low. Helena watched him stand by the window, shoulders rigid, hands clenched at his sides. "You're thinking about her," she said softly. He didn't ask who. "Yes," he replied. "I don't want to replace her," Helena said quickly. "I would never." "You're not," Hunter interrupted, turning to face her. His voice was rough. "This isn't about replacement. It's about fear." He moved closer, stopping at the foot of the bed. "I thought if I kept my distance, I could control it. The loss, the waiting. But every time you wince, every time you grow quiet, it's like I'm back there again." Helena's eyes filled with tears. "Then why stay?" "Because I couldn't live with myself if I didn't." He took a breath, steadying himself. "You said once you were alone and carrying this child," he continued. "That ends now." She looked at him, heart pounding. "Helena," he said, voice low but certain, "from today on, you won't face this alone. If you'll have me, you'll be my wife." The words settled into the room, heavy and real. She searched his face not for passion, not for grand romance, but for truth. "What about the child?" she asked. Hunter stepped closer and placed his hand over her belly, firm and sure. "This child will carry my name," he said, "not out of duty, out of choice." Helena broke then, tears spilling freely. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes." Grace stood in the doorway, one hand pressed to her mouth, smiling through tears. They married quietly a few days later. No guests beyond Grace and the local preacher. No finery. Helena wore a simple dress. Grace had altered with care. Hunter stood straight and solemn, his hand steady in hers. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Hunter leaned down and kissed Helena's forehead, a promise more than a celebration. The birth came in early winter. Snow fell thick and heavy outside, muffling the world. Inside, the house was tense with motion and breath and whispered instructions. Helena screamed, cried, nearly lost herself to fear. Hunter never left her side. He held her hand, murmured steady words, his voice breaking only once when the baby's cry finally filled the room. "It's a boy," the midwife announced, smiling. Helena sobbed with relief as the child was placed against her chest. Hunter stared, stunned, tears tracking silently down his face. "Our son," he whispered. Grace wept openly in the corner. They named the child Samuel. Life did not become perfect. There were sleepless nights. Hunter was awkward with the baby at first, unsure of his strength, terrified of doing something wrong. Helena tired easily, her body slow to recover. But there was laughter now, warmth, belonging. One evening, months later, Helena sat on the porch with Samuel in her arms as the sun dipped low. Hunter joined her, draping a blanket over both of them. "You ever regret it?" she asked quietly. He shook his head. "Not once." She leaned into him, watching the land stretch out before them. "I was so sure I'd die by that river," she said. Hunter kissed her hair. "You didn't." "No," she agreed softly. "I lived." And for the first time in her life, Helena knew deep in her bones that she was no longer merely surviving. She was home,